Okay, hey guys, can we get started?
What?
What? Sorry. Yeah, we don't have a mic here, so anybody see a car out there that they're super excited about?
Mine?
That doesn't count.
Oh, okay.
That doesn't count. Yeah, that's pretty cool, wasn't it? Pretty cool. All right, this is 5 things all new EV owners need to know about charging. So who this presentation is for, somebody considering their first EV, anyone who wants to become more familiar with the unique language of EVs, anyone who wants a refresher course, right, on how to keep your battery as healthy as possible over the long run. And this is, information, this is my disclaimer, right? I'm not a lawyer, but this is my lawyer speak, right? This is all industry, average information. Your results will vary, right? As we saw in some of the earlier presentations, there's all kinds of different battery chemistries and different models. And so we're talking kind of in averages or generalities here for charging, all right? Okay, a little bit about me. First of all, I'm an EV owner and enthusiast. My wife and I, Michelle, right there. We own 2 EVs, so I drive a Ford F-150 Lightning, and it's the gray one that's parked next to the blue food truck. So I'm actually powering that food truck right now. So I got a 30 amp outlet in the bed, and we're running power to that food cart so he doesn't have to be running a generator. I'm a board member for the Oregon Electric Vehicle Association and also president of EV Charge PDX. So we do level 2 charger installations. So that's all we do. It makes us a little bit different than most electricians. Okay, so what we're going to go over today, briefly, so charging types, rate of charge, right? I mean, there's basically 3 levels. We'll talk about kind of what you can expect with each one of those. Best practices for long-term battery health, effects of hot and cold temperatures on battery, preconditioning, what that is and when it really applies, and why Tesla opening up their supercharger network is a big deal. So charger types. So you guys are probably all familiar with this, right? Basically 3 levels, level 1, 2, and DC fast charging. So level 1, the easiest way to think about that is 120 volt circuit, right? Level 2 is a 240 volt circuit. And then DC fast charging is, the faster chargers out in the public, and those are going DC directly to the battery, so DC to DC. There's no conversion going on there. The most important thing to keep in mind with this is the range when we're charging. With level 1, with a household 120 volt circuit, we're going to get anywhere from 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 miles of range for every hour we charge. With a level 2, that's going to go up pretty dramatically, 20 to 30 miles, right? And there's a bunch of different levels of level 2. So again, we're talking averages here. And then DC fast charging, these are the fast chargers, obviously, out in the public that you can fully charge your battery, or at least 20 to 80%, for example, in a matter of 15, 20, 30 minutes. Okay, so most of us non-Tesla owners use what's called the J1772 or CCS connector style, but it's not really as elegant and as nice as the Tesla adapter, the Tesla plug. So the industry is really moving to the J3400 or Tesla, what Tesla calls the North American Charging Standard, which is their term, abbreviation NACS for that. So in most new EVs, right, non-Tesla EVs, are going to have that native Tesla-style port on their cars starting sometime in 2025. There are adapters to go between the two. So my opinion, if you're looking at a car, don't get too hung up on when that vehicle is going to have that Tesla port. There's plenty of chargers out there, right, non-Tesla chargers, and with an adapter, you'll be able to use that Tesla charging network. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But the short story is I wouldn't get too hung up on whether that car is going to have it like Q1, Q2, Q3 of 2025. So what type of home charger is best for you really depends on your use case. We heard some of that from the folks that did the presentation on buying a used EV, but to boil it down, if you have a EV with a relatively small battery and I'll pick a number less than 70 kilowatt hours, and or you only drive a few miles a few times a week, you'll probably be just fine with a level 1 charger. I mean, you think of a level 1 charger as like a trickle charger, right? So if you're only going to the store, right, a couple times a week, and then in between those trips, you can plug in your charger and just let it constantly charge, then you'll likely be just fine.
We've had our Model 3 for 6 years. We charge on the level 1. My wife is out all the time, and it's not been that hard to manage.
Yeah.
Unless you have 2 days in a row where you're going to be going 50, 60, 80 miles.
Yeah.
The rest of the time you're going back in. And we charge just on the off-peak at night.
Yeah, so that's a great point, right? It's really based on your vehicle and your use case, right? If in fact you have a larger battery and or drive more miles. So my wife and I both drive a fair number of miles. So, and I have with the truck 100 kilowatt hour battery. So for us, it would be not practical at all to live on a level 1 charger. A level 2 charger just changes the game. It makes it super convenient. As you mentioned, right, we only charge during the off-peak hours. We're on the PG plan, so we get a big discount for charging overnight. And I'll talk about battery health, but there's some reasons why you want to just charge, kind of top up your battery more frequently rather than deeper charges. So really, we're only charging a couple hours at a time anyway. So, but we couldn't do that if we didn't have a level 2 charger. So it really is based on your use case. And then all the local utilities provide incentives for level 2 chargers, so in terms of rebates, so they help you, so make it pretty cost effective. All right, so shifting to best practices for long-term battery health. And when I'm talking about long-term battery health, I'm talking about, over hundreds of charge cycles, this behavior is going to help reduce battery degradation. If you have a lease and you have your car for 2 years and you don't really, if you're going to turn it back in and you don't care, then you don't have to worry about it so much, right? But if you're like us, we like to keep our vehicles over a longer period of time, and we like to do whatever we can to maintain the most expensive part in that vehicle, which is the battery. So the first thing we want to do is limit our charging for commuting and road trips when practical to 80%, right? So as we've heard in some of the other presentations, heat is really the enemy of these batteries. And more heat is generated at the top of the charge curve. So in other words, once the battery reaches an 80% state of charge, it's a little harder for those electrons to find their homes, and more resistance, more heat is generated. And over time, if we do that repeatedly, that's one of the factors that causes degradation over time. So if we can limit it to 80%, and every single EV has a simple, max charge setting, on board that allows you to set that. And it really applies to all types of charging, right? Whether it's level 1, level 2, or DC fast charging. And in fact, with DC fast charging, if you're at one of those fast public chargers, and let's say you're on a road trip and you have to go, to 100% battery state of charge to get to your next charging destination. The amount of time it's going to take you for that battery to get from, let's say, 20 to 80%, I'm going to pick a number. I'm going to say that's 30 minutes, right? And that's, again, going to vary based on the speed of the charger and how big your battery is and temperature, all those things. But let's say that it takes 30 minutes. It may take an hour or longer to go from 80 to 100%. And the reason for that is because, and I'll show you this in the next slide, but the charge curve, the rate of charge drops off a cliff after 80%. And the manufacturers do this to protect the battery, because at 80%, I don't know why that number is magical, right? But much more heat is being generated. So it means that it's going to slow way down. So closer to 100%, then you're charging like a weak level 2 charger. So if you can get to your next stop with an 80% charge, then that's what you need to do, because you'll spend a lot less time with the charger, right? If you're on a road trip and you have to charge 100% to get to your next stop, then it's not really a thing, right? think about it, right? And doing it once or when you're on a road trip is not going to really hurt the battery, right? We're talking about repeated charge cycles over a long period of time. So this is the charge curve. So this is for my truck, the Ford Lightning. So just to illustrate, you can see it's a there's a little boost in the beginning, but relatively flat curve, right? Until 80%, and as you can see, it just drops off a cliff, and closer to 100%, we're down to like 5 or 7 kilowatts, right? So if you really need a 100% charge on a road trip, you're going to be sitting there for a long time. In every car, this curve is going to look different for every vehicle also, right? But just to illustrate the point of charge with 80% and get back on the road when that meets your range needs. Okay, so the other thing we can do, other than charge to 80%, is charge with smaller charge cycles. As I mentioned, right, a deeper charge cycle, again, there's just going to be more heat there. So what I mean is, if we're out just commuting, driving around, right, and my battery's down to a 60% state of charge, I'm going to top it up that night to 80%, rather than waiting until that battery's down to 10 or 20% and then doing a deeper charge, right? So these are little things. I mean, again, in a short period of time, you're not going to see any real difference with this, right? But over the life of the battery, right, if I can do this and it helps reduce the degradation. I mean, I've seen studies, I'm pulling this information from studies I've seen where they did hundreds of charge cycles. And if you follow these practices, the amount of degradation over like hundreds, like 300 charge cycles, it's nominal. It barely reduces at all. So it does make a difference, but obviously it's not going to show up. Okay, so effects of hot and cold on batteries. So as most of us know, heat is really the enemy of these batteries. That's why we don't want to charge past 80% unless we need to. And to this point, if you're charging at a public fast charger, right, or even at home on a level 2 charger sometimes, you plug in, it's a warm day, you're going to hear the fans come on, right, because it's trying to cool that battery down to optimize the charging performance. So these batteries like to be kind of temperate, so kind of comfortable like us. Our 70, 80 degrees is like, I don't know what the exact number is, but comfortable temperature, right? Cold, not so good, and hot is not good either. You're not going to get optimal charging performance, right, in either of those conditions, really hot or really cold.
When my band first kicked on, I had to go plug it in, and the thing, I sounded like it was trying to take off. It's just like, it scared the heck out of me. It's like, is something wrong here?
Yeah. When a DC fast charger, right, at a warm day, it's like it could be on in the charger and on your vehicle, and I was like, what's going on here? Yeah. Right, but that's what it's doing. It's just trying to cool down that battery, right, so that it, because it's creating heat, obviously, when you're charging, so it's got to, help mitigate that. So I'm not going to get into battery chemistry, right? Brian did that in the last presentation, but so most of this applies to whether it's lithium ion or LFP batteries, right? But LFP batteries are a little bit different in that you are required to charge those to 100% on a regular schedule, but that's not for battery health. And actually it's not really good for that battery, but you have to do it for the range to be calibrated correctly. So that's just an anomaly with that battery chemistry, right? So it's simply required. So again, it's not so they are less sensitive to heat, right? So that is a factor, but it's still not ideal to have to charge it to 100%, but you have to do that for the range only. So, what's that?
What kind of cars have those?
So they're beginning to show up in more vehicles. So their LFP batteries are less energy dense, meaning you got to have a slightly larger battery for the same amount of output. So they're a little heavier, a little cheaper though. So you tend to find them in the standard range models. So for example, they're in Tesla Model 3 and Model Y standard range vehicles. Now they're in the Ford Mach-E standard range. Rivian will be introducing models with LFP batteries. I believe the Lightning is going to have an LFP battery. So again, they're typically in their standard range where you don't need quite as much total range. And it's sometimes not super easy to know what type of battery is in a vehicle. Every manufacturer treats that a little bit differently, so you have to do a little bit of research, right, to figure that out. But we're seeing more of those, right, just because it's a little, I mean, there's a number of different, benefits and downsides of all these different battery chemistries, but the vast majority of the EVs on the road today in the US are lithium ion. Okay, so cold temperatures have kind of opposite effect, right? So they're not, it's not necessarily damaging, right, to operate these things in cold temperature, but everything slows down a lot, right, in the cold. So if we're talking about, for freezing or below, your range can be pretty heavily impacted, right? So 30% or potentially more depending on the temperature and the conditions. So most of the time we don't have to care about range if we're commuting. In other words, right, there are things we can do to mitigate how much of our battery is used, right, to keep us comfortable. So in a gas car, right, we got our gas burning engine that puts off a bunch of heat, and we can use that to heat the cabin, right, to make us comfortable or cool it. But in an EV, we don't have that luxury, so we have to use that same battery to heat the cabin. So in the cold, if you're on a road trip and you need to maximize your range, then what you can do is rather than use your HVAC or not have it up as high, rely on your heated seat and steering wheel, right? Much more efficient than heating the entire cabin. But if you're commuting, it's like you're gonna go home that night and plug in at home, then be comfortable, don't worry about it, right? So it's really only when we're on a long trip and we need to just eke out every mile that we have available. So newer EVs, if you're a big road tripper and you're looking for an EV and you want to maximize your range, then some newer models have heat pumps, which make that whole process more efficient. So it's not going to be dramatic. It doesn't give you another 20% of efficiency, but it does help, right? So if that's your use case, then look for one that has a heat pump. And charging is going to take longer in extreme cold. I mean, we saw a study, right, big news report, I think it was in Chicago this past winter, right, about, people not being able to charge. And people have to remember is that if you park your car outside and it's 0 degrees and you drive directly to a DC fast charger, the first, few minutes, I mean, and this will vary, right, but of charging is used to warm up that battery. So people were saying, oh no, I plugged in for 15 minutes and it's hardly even registered. Well, because the battery is at 0 degrees, right, and so you're using all that energy to warm up the battery to get it to a point where it can accept a reasonable rate of charge. So, here in the Northwest, we don't have to worry about that so much, right? We don't get these extreme temperatures, but everything slows down in the cold, and that certainly applies to charging. So one other thing that we can do, particularly on road trips, right, is we can precondition our battery. Now, most new EVs have this capability. You have to check, again, if you're going to be doing road trips. What you can do is typically you need to use the onboard or the manufacturer's navigation system, right? And say, okay, I'm driving to Eugene, so I plotted my route and it knows what DC fast charger I'm going to next. You can say, tell it with preconditioning, it will warm up or cool down your battery before you get to that stop. So when you get there, the battery's at a more optimal temperature to get an efficient rate of charge, right? So, so again, that'll work in the heat, hot or cold temperatures. Again, really is only relevant in cold weather. And then another type of preconditioning is we can simply warm up the cabin in the cars in the garage, let's say, or on the street even, right, as long as it's plugged in, we can say, hey, I've got a meeting, I'm gonna leave at 7 a.m. and using your AC, right, electrical energy, it will warm up the car for you so you can get in and it's not freezing cold, right? So that's another type of, kind of cabin preconditioning.
So does cabin preconditioning have any relationship to the battery preconditioning?
No, I think they're separate. Yeah, because preconditioning on a road trip, that's all internal to the car, right? When you're warming up your cabin, you're using your AC, right, because you're plugged in, right? So, yeah, two different things. So I think, okay, so the other thing, last slide, is the number of DC fast chargers just got much larger, right, for all us non-Tesla drivers. I'm sure you guys have all heard, but virtually every manufacturer has negotiated with Tesla to use their supercharger network. It's a one at a time kind of a rollout, right? But what it means is that for a couple of us, Ford and Rivian today, with an adapter, I have the ability to go to a Tesla supercharger and charge. So the number of chargers across the country has now more than doubled for me. I think there's 15,000 version 3 Tesla superchargers out there, and I have access to every one of those in addition to all the CCS ones. We just did a road trip up to Victoria, BC a couple weeks ago, and we ended up not using a Tesla charger just because it was convenient to use our regular CCS chargers, and it was a little less costly, and they worked without issue, right? But just to have that knowledge that I have now this access to so many more Tesla chargers is a real advantage. And every manufacturer will have this, but again, that's a rollout. So you could talk to the dealers, right, and see if they can give you information on if you're interested in a particular car, when that might be available, for that brand. It does require an adapter, but pretty good value proposition, right? A couple $100, and you have access to all these extra chargers, right? And as I mentioned before, new cars are going to start coming with that Tesla port, native, but that's going to be sometime next year. I do have. I will make available the presentation if anybody's interested. Here's my contact information, and we got time for a question or two if anybody has any. Yeah.
If you charge using level 1 to 100%, does that cause any contribute to battery degradation?
I don't know, honestly. I don't know the answer. I think that because it's such a small amount of current being used, I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you want to be super cautious, then I would say don't charge to 100%. Because any battery, once it gets close to that point, more heat is generated. But it's certainly going to be less heat, right, on that really small circuit. Do you have a question?
I think maybe you just answered the question, but on my Tesla, sometimes I forget to lock my iPhone before I put it in my pocket, and so I accidentally, the charge max level goes from 80 to 100%. I just forget about the whole thing, and then like in the middle of the evening I check it, and my car's at 100%.
Yeah.
Should I stress about that?
No, not really, because again, we're talking about differences over hundreds of charge cycles. So it happens once in a while, and if we're on a road trip, it's like not uncommon to charge 100% just for that peace of mind, right? So no, I wouldn't sweat it, right? Just make your regular routine, keep it at 80, change it next time. But no, it's like if you do it occasionally, I don't think it's going to have any.
You got your Tesla and not stress, so don't stress.
Well, and you've got all those Uber and Lyft drivers who charge to 100 all the time, and their cars are still great after.
So if it's at 100%, I shouldn't panic-strickenly go out and drive at 10% up?
No. Well, you don't want to, again, we're talking, small little changes over time, right? You don't want to leave your battery at 100% and not drive it, right? So if you're going to store your battery, right, long term, let's say you're going to, you're going on a trip, you're going to Europe in the summertime, and it's hot. They recommend that you store it like at a 30% state of charge, right? You definitely don't want to store your battery at 100% and leave it there for any extended period of time without driving it. That is. Oh yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the info, Rob. I saw a GM electric car charging at a destination charger, one of the Tesla slow chargers with the adapter.
Yeah.
I was excited to see that.
Yeah.
Can you do that with your Ford too, or is it only the level 3s?
I would have to think that I could, but I haven't ever looked because if I'm on a road trip, I don't want to be doing a level 2 charger,
Tesla,
right?
you could only access the level 3s. I think it has to do with communication.
Well, yeah. So level 3 is that we have access to. The destination chargers, again, I just haven't looked because, I don't know, why would I want to do a level 2? I mean, that would be just like kind of,
I use them a lot as a Tesla driver because I have to travel for work and I can charge for free. I don't have to pay Tesla to supercharge.
Yeah.
Now, you might check it because those are just usually wide open at the hotels and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few of them.
well, I would guess so, because just with the standard adapter, right, it should, oh, yeah, again, I haven't really paid attention to that because the fast charging was really kind of the big prize, right? Yeah. All right.